All right, let's kick this thing off. Let's get going. So we are here today, the new economics of fraud. And so we're really what we wanted to show is that what network scale data reveals about what's happened, but especially what's going to be happening in the next 18 months. So with that in mind, I'm Philip Verley. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Liminal. We sit across the whole identity and fraud market. So most of what I'll bring today is that wider view from what you're seeing everywhere at once. But I didn't want to just stand up here and actually sitting down here and talk to you all for 45 minutes. So I brought the market view with me because the market view alone is not going to do it. So Davi, if you don't mind introducing yourself, introducing Unico, and tell them what you get to see that I don't get to see from my overall market view.
Hello, thank you, Philip. So I'm Davi. I'm VP of Strategy at Unico. We are an identity network back in Brazil, Latin, and now working everywhere in the world. We provide liveness solutions, identity solutions, and it's been very exciting year or so with the rise of deepfakes and all the sophisticated threats that are coming with the time of AI. So I've been lucky, well, maybe you can say that I've been lucky to be behind the curtains and seeing this develop in real time. And man, things are crazy right now.
Yeah, they've never, I feel like, we say this all the time, but they've never been crazier than now. It's just like an LLM model, right? The LLM model is only going to be as bad as it was yesterday. It's only going to get crazier with all this stuff. Quick quick housekeeping notes. The session is recorded. We will be able to share this replay with all registrants and drop any questions in the Q&A panel at any time. The Q&A panel is down on the right-hand side of your screen. So any questions, we are going to hold 15 minutes for questions at the end, but we might sprinkle in one or two during the conversation as well, just to break it up a little bit. What we're looking at here is what we wanted to find out from yourselves in the audience is, where do you sit on this spectrum of this institutional spectrum? Two questions you have to ask yourself, and maybe you can note it down and get it into Q&A later. But how often does your verification run? And then what and whose data does it use during that verification cycle? So if it runs once at onboarding on data that you hold yourself, we call that a one, which is isolated and static. If you are running it all the time, but it still only goes against your own data, we call that a three, continuous internal. If you are pulling in signals from outside your own walls in real time, we call that a five, which is network native. So two and four are obviously steps in between those levels. So be honest with yourself and tell us exactly where you are today versus what the roadmap says you're going to be in Q4. I'm going to try to work on the poll before the end of this session, but if not, keep that in mind. Where do you think you sit on this spectrum? And Davi, on the record, before we get anyone's answers, we might not get anyone's answers, but I would love to make a prediction. Where do you think the room is going to land? Where do you think this audience is going to be? Is it between one and five? Where do you think they're going to cluster?
I think most companies are still between two and three. So two is unavoidable right now because the threat is coming and because it's happening all the time. I think people have evolved to three, but they still don't know how powerful four and five are and how that can change the game for them. So maybe after this talk, we can help people getting up on this.
Yeah, I think you're right. So let's keep that in mind as we go. So before we did this, we also ran this same survey to your peers ahead of today's conversation. And if you look at the results, the blue bubbles, the pre-webinar poll, you're seeing 52% between rung one and two, and only 19% we're seeing as connected or network native. Network native is just 5% of the population. So keep that in mind because we're about to get into what this other half of the market is really up against. And so with that in mind, now we're going to get really into it. So why did attacking get so cheap? And the reason is because the economics flipped, right? The economics split because fraud loss is now growing faster than the systems built to contain them. For years, fraud was a line item that you were able to model. You sized the reserve, you priced it in, and you moved on. You had a line item in your budget and you were set to go. And that worked for a reason, because attacks were expensive. They weren't cheap. They took a lot of effort, and it was, these are run like businesses. So the cost of doing these attacks was filtering for you. You wouldn't have to see constant, continuous attacks because fraudsters didn't have the monetary. I'm sorry, didn't have the resources to make that happen. Now, fraudster had to decide: Are you worth my effort? Do I have the right tools and skills to come after your system? um, they had the limited resources, so they had to be careful. Now, imagine you don't have to do that anymore because that's where we are today. Sophisticated attacks today are 100x cheaper than they were a few years ago. And I'm saying sophisticated. This is not like, oh, I have a bank, bank routing number, or I have some account numbers, and I'm going to run 100 of them right away. No, we're talking true sophistication, things that you're probably not catching. It's really hard to catch. And so with that, if you're sitting on one of those lower rungs, but below 3, you are probably not even seeing these attacks, even though they're happening on your system. And so when the attack is basically free, it doesn't need to pay off anymore. You could just pump it with volume. And so the volume climbs on its own because there's nothing telling the attacker to be picky. They can just annihilate your system because it's so cheap to do, and it becomes so sophisticated that it's really hard to catch. So with that in mind, you're seeing $400 billion in losses in a single year, and we're projecting a 150% increase in the rise of financial institution fraud losses by 2030. Davi, that 100x number is Unico's number. You are sitting there from where you're sitting in the network. Is it really that crazy? Is it really that intense? Or is that like a number to catch a headline says, oh, 100x? Tell us a little bit more about where this is coming from.
So it's real, Philip. So the reality is that to do a deepfake style attack in the past, you had to be a computer science expert. You probably had to have a graduation, a master's on computer vision. You really had to understand how to do that attack. And now it's very available, right? So everyone has get access to this new technology that you can use as a threat source. This technology is being uh, funded by entertainment industry, by the AI companies with billions of dollars. So this is getting available as a byproduct to ill intended attackers, right? And it's not only the fact of the costs falling down, it does not affect only the axis of one fraudster becoming more powerful, right? So you get more fraudsters getting into the opportunity as well. So you have two axes moving. Each fraudster becomes more effective, and you have way more people trying to do it. And when you add that up with the fact that fraud attempts on the digital world have virtually no consequences, well, everyone is trying that.
So Davi, so in your and again in the network, when did you start realizing that it's like, hey, we really got to double down here because the things we used to catch by simple rules, that's out the window.
So in 2024, we are seeing attacks using deepfake technology showing up, and they already had us up in arms. We had to develop more systems, but they were not part of our day to day. They were more like an event, right? From time to time, there would pop up a fraudster that was very sophisticated. But in early 2025, things started to change. We saw the fraudsters coming back and people trying new techniques, and the number of people growing. And then like Q2 2025, it started to climb, and it didn't stop, Philip. So it's still there. Yes.
Totally, totally. And so that leads me into the next slide that we have here, which is really sophisticated fraud has now become a quarter of all attacks. And again, Davi, this is your slide, but let me just quickly set it up here. Um, Walk him through the ladder. Where is all of this going? And give us a little bit more about why is level one shrinking? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Love to get your take on this.
So level one was, especially the simple version of it, was the most common form of fraud against biometric systems that we used it to see, right? So it was very common. Someone, sometimes from same family, right? So sometimes partners would get a picture of them, of the other individual, and point the phone into that picture, and that was the basic class of attack. And it worked against several systems back in 2023, 2024, and we still see them. But it's now very accessible, and they're not very effective anymore, so they're shrinking. uh, the physical presentation as a vector still exists. So people are showing deep fakes in monitors, but we classify those as sophisticated. But the opportunistic attack against using a relative picture or someone's, or just pointing to some random picture from the internet, it doesn't work anymore anywhere. So people are still trying, but doesn't pay off, right? Uh, Simple injection, it still happens, right? So you still get a number there, right? So because there are still solutions in the market that are going to fall for simple injection, and the reality is that simple injection techniques, they keep getting renewed. So from time to time, new flaws arrives, new versions of phones, and people discover how to exploit them, and you have these waves of simple injection attacks. But the real, I don't think those are going to go away, right? But the real novel technique is that these attacks, both presentation and simple injection, now are being combined into sophisticated fraud. The fraudsters use those channels to deliver the attack, but they create the attack payload using deepfake technology. And that constitutes a sophisticated fraud that would cost people, I don't know, hundreds of dollars or a lot of investment in education in the past. But now it's getting very cheap, very cheap. So sophisticated fraud combines everything, and it's almost getting into a service that people are trying everywhere, and it keeps climbing. It was a very small amount of frauds in the past.
And I like, yeah, thank you for explaining that. But maybe a little bit more, one more detail on this as well is, so what would you classify specifically as sophisticated fraud? I know you answered a little bit, but give us one more concrete example of that reaches the level of sophisticated fraud, which used to be a very small percentage, and now again it's that almost a quarter of every attack.
So when you first started to classify those internally, we would say that a sophisticated fraud is some fraud where the attacker trying to invest over $100 setting up the attack. And $100 is not that much, but it's still, for fraudsters, it means that it stopped, it took time, right? So it's really a directed effort. It's not opportunistic, right? But we saw attacks where the investments probably past $20,000, or even past that. These are all sophisticated attacks. And we started to classify those attacks as such. And usually they involve a combination of injection technique. They started to have deepfake as a sophisticated deepfake technique as part of the payload there in the attack. And the reality is that the same attacks that use it to cost $100 now probably can be made by 10. We still classify them as sophisticated attacks, right? Because they're still hard to defend. The techniques, the fraudster is not paying much for the deep fake technology, but the reality is that the deep fake technology is taking those billions of investment from the AI companies, industry companies, and from our side, it's all sophisticated now.
And so, yeah, thank you. And so here, the bottom is shrinking because everybody's just moving up. Because again, that cost has gone down. It's so much easier to do. So it's not like we're solving the physical presentation problem. It's disappeared because we'll just go up the ladder. The fraudsters are just a little bit more sophisticated now because they
Better
don't have to
payoff,
waste.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a better payoff, and it's this it's 1/100th of the price they used to pay. So why not? Why wouldn't you move yourself up? Okay, so now this one really got me. And again, Davi, this is your area here, but this number is the one that really changed the way I was thinking about this whole thing. When we were doing this, research together, 949 identity documents tied to a single entity. Davi, you've looked at millions, if not billions, of transactions across the network. Out of all of them, why specifically did this one stick out to you and the team?
So I think this shows not only the effectiveness of this new class of fraud techniques that we're seeing through deepfakes and AI automation in general, but it shows how easy to scale this is, right? So as you said, you you can try many times because it doesn't even take your time. We have seen people doing full automation of attacks, right? So they gather Facebook accounts. Everyone has a picture of the internet. It's not like they look at the picture and say, "Oh, I'll try to fraud this guy," right? So they just try if they can match any information to a face. That is the minimal thing that they need. They will automatically generate those deepfakes and automatically run the attacks. And when we are on the other side, we get to see the same attacker trying over and over again, right? So we know it's coming from the same phone, it's coming from the same IP. We know it's the timing of the attacks. We get to see everything. And we have never seen a single attacker being as effective as they are today. And here you have an example, right? So single guy going after over 1,000 identity documents, right? And he doesn't need to stop there. So the reason we stopped seeing him is because you were effective at blocking him. See, he tried several times against Unico clients. It eventually gave up on that, but he probably succeeded elsewhere, right? So this number is probably an underestimate when you look at the fraudster perspective. He's fishing everywhere because it's super cheap. He doesn't even need to be looking at the computer, right? He probably having lunch. So and the fraud's going on.
And I loved when Davi's done this presentation for me in office, but I love when you called it the stranger problem. And that it's really this person, 949 attempts, it's a stranger to the next institution in the cycle. Because if I turn it on to the audience, and hey audience, you are the 12th organization, what gets pulled over from the previous 9, 10, 11th organization? Nothing. This is just a new onboarding, a new ID, a new face that you're treating as just a complete stranger. So Davi, how do you talk to your customers about, how do you talk to them about that? How do you instill this, like, hey, you are part of this network already. You're just not seeing it. You're standing on the outside. You are in the network. You're just not getting any benefit.
That is right, Philip. So we have the notion of the network from the defense side, and you have the network on the attack side, right? So and they are part of the network of victims, right? So the attacker is trying to get all of them. And for us to fight on equal grounds, we also need to have the defense network, and that's part of the service that Unico provides, right? So everyone that is connected to Unico, if there is one attack against one institution, we know about the attack and we can already protect the next institution against that attack. This is a very important property because attacks are very dynamic, and very often we see the attack being developed on institution A, and when it gets to institution B, it's already very refined, right? It's very hard for institution B to defend on moment zero. And because we've been monitoring, because we have been rising these defenses for institution A, institution B gets the benefit out of that immediately, right? So attacks are dynamic. People, if you don't look into the whole context, right? So if you're looking only at the picture, you don't get access to the movie. It's very hard to know what is going on. That's why Unico, we do not only provide the technology, but we invite you to join this network and fight fraud together. Because when fraud goes down, the reality is that everyone wins, right? So everyone does more business. It's not a zero-sum game, right? So everyone gets to a bigger piece of the pie that grows because the frauds are out. So yeah, that's the network effect. One of the main features here at Unico, and that's where I think the whole protection needs to go, right? So you cannot find billions of dollars of investment in technology with technology alone. You need to network yourself so that you have a chance of being one step ahead.
And I'm sure there's some skeptics in the audience of like, hey, my legal team and this and that. We'll get to that in a little bit later in the slides, but I do have a live question I wanted to ask since it seems appropriate around here. In the network, would you do you recommend that the folks sharing the data should be in the same vertical, like financial institutions sharing with financial institutions, e-commerce platforms sharing with e-commerce, marketplaces like an Airbnb sharing, if this was, possible, sharing with booking.com, or it doesn't really matter, it's agnostic across the space.
So it's agnostic across the space, but for people concerned, I think it's a win-win proposition. I very often receive the CISOs of several banks. We all sit together, we go through fraud together, and we fight for fraud together. From time to time, the banks work together, they get some fraudsters in jail, and everyone benefits out of that, right? So it's not um, I think there is this understanding, and I think it's a very fair understanding that if we get fraud out, then consumers win and everyone can compete on their merits, right? So if you're competing on the other side, the reality is that everyone is going to lose together. So we always get together. I think different fields need to network as well. That's the way it works in Unico. Very often fraud starts in retail, then it moves to banks. The reality is that frauds are opportunistic. They're always going to move to where they succeed, the weakest link.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, And just like we just talked about for a second here, is any market actually safe? And so, with that in mind, again, Davi, this is the Unico data that we've been talking about, but it sounds like is it generalized? And I think you kind of answered that as well. Um, so on this one is the techniques are global, right? The tooling is borderless. There's no limitation to where a fraudster can do these attacks. Um, so it doesn't matter what's different between the market is where you're on the curve. So 11% synthetic identity frauds share of global cases, grown roughly 8x year over year. And then 48.3% synthetic share in Latin America, the leading edge where, over 500,000 deep fakes were blocked in one deployment. When we are like, oh, well, Latin America, South America, that's a, more risky area. What do you say to people like that? Is like, oh, this is not going to travel, even though we have that third number on the screen that says it's already traveling. What would you advise folks to say? No, this is not an issue for me. I have the coolest tools. I'm not seeing this problem. This is a South America, maybe Asia market. This is not us.
So that's a good illusion to have, right? So to believe that to be the case, right? So everything here is borderless. It's really a matter of time, right? So we see those things in Latin America, not because Latin American people commit more fraud. The reason we see it first in Latin America is because the fintech services in Latin America were more aggressive at decreasing friction and giving a better service to people, right? So you don't have retail agencies in banks for a long time in Latin America. It's because the world has gone digital more aggressively in these markets, and then fraudsters come and they start to operate on that opportunity, right? And we see that it's not only the fraud that is borderless, the fraudsters themselves are also borderless. So we block it most of the liveness attacks, deepfakes attacks in Brazil through our network. And the reality is that Argentina is going through a big crisis in liveness now. And it's not only that the Argentinians learned how to do it, that the opportunity came to them, right? It's because Argentina started to have more advanced financial systems going digital. Then the Brazilian fraudster found another opportunity. Now we see them operating in Argentina, right? So in the West, where the curve stands in the West right now, there is still significant friction at operating financial products in the West. It's changing now. It's easier to pay digitally. It's easier to transfer money. Is there are not many products where you can borrow money like in the same day that you open your bank account. These are very common in South America. But when this product comes, then the opportunity for the fraudster also come. And it's good that these products arrive because people are better serviced with these frauds. So I think it's a matter of time for the trade-off between friction and effectiveness of attack to land here in the West. And it's not going to land because the West is a different market. It's just because the West financial system is going to evolve. And when it evolves, it wants to serve more people, serve them better, and then the attackers jump in.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, just like I mentioned, if you're thinking it's not going to happen here or it's not going to happen in a certain market, here's a number that should stop you, right? In 2024, $3.3 billion synthetic identity exposure at U.S. financial institutions, even with mature defenses in place. And again, it's not about maturity of the market or anything like that. It's just the change. It's just change is what's slipping through. And so even though you think you're in charge, you're not because all of these things are happening. Attacks are up 8% globally. 74% of institutions are saying they are spotting synthetic or first party fraud. And they also say that's a very much a weak spot for them that they are really concerned and struggling with. So they're feeling it. They just haven't rebuilt for it yet. And so I think that's a big point here is that it doesn't matter where you are. This is going to happen to you. So now why has nobody solved this? And again, where we think this is happening is because the gap for us feels structural. So if you look at this one, 93% of practitioners trust their fraud models, which is great. But then also on the same side, those same people, 92% of them admit their legacy infrastructure is still letting signals go through. So both of these could be true at once. And that's really the point, because this isn't an effort problem. People are really trying to solve this. They are really working hard to figure out how to reduce losses. But it's a structural one. The gap is opening up right when you feel like it's most under control. Hey, you know what? We got through it, right? Our system is ready to go. We've stopped the bleeding. We're all set. And next thing you know, it's happening again because the tools you built for that moment are already out of date. The threats are going so quickly that your systems are not able to keep up. And so, Davi, that 92% leak, are you seeing that on your side as well? Are customers coming to you and saying, hey, we think we got everything set up correctly, but still we're not seeing any sort of progress. When they come to you, what is your advice?
So the moment that they come to me is when they are in crisis, right? So most of the time, people are in some state of balance, right? So they're liking this what you see in this slide. They trust their models, and they understand there are flaws, but they are living in peace mode, right? So they're living in peace mode, and when they first come to us is when they have a crisis, and the crises are going to come from biometrics have arrived in the US. So I think in Latin America, people use biometrics for several years now. And I think probably just in the last few years that you can onboard airplanes with your face, all this kind of things in the West. So it's a recent change. So the crises are going to come, the war mode is going to come, and they're going to understand that they need to level up their defenses. But Philip, the really interesting thing is that people have trouble understanding how much they're losing at peace times, right?
Mm,
Because the defenses that they rise it up, they might be effective, sort of effective against the simple attacks, but they're very costful in their user experience. So when people come to Unico, they come, I want you to stop the fraud, but what it really delivers is not only that we stop the fraud, but we stop the conversion leaks. We let users go through much more conveniently. The acquisition funnels work much better, and everyone makes more money. So people come for us. I need to stop your losses, my losses, but what they get is that they increase their revenue, right? And it's really, really amazing when you can offer that to clients, right? So sometimes we get people in peace mode convinced, they try, they think, well, my users didn't deserve all the hooks that I made they jump before, and the whole world gets happier. But most of the cost is not against the losses in crisis. If you lose too much in crisis, you don't talk to us because you'll go bankrupt. It's too late. When you talk to us, you still have a chance. But most of the loss is not fraud. It's revenue that you never have a chance because it's so hard to get into your system legitimately.
That's it. Yeah, it's a great point, right? Like you can, I always thought of it as levers. You can pull levers, and if you pull on the lever a little hard, you're going to open up another gate. When we had an account takeover problem, we would really pull on that lever, but then forget about the account recovery side or the new onboarding. So you have to figure out that balance, and that balance is really, really tough to do. And especially if you're thinking about it as your own, if you're just playing with your own data, you can continue to improve and increase your tooling and increase your signals. But if it's just your own data, you're still always going to get kind of stuck. That you're not going to see the entire picture. And so that consortium style, that network style, it's going to be more and more important, just as you've mentioned before. Now, again, here's another thing that we wanted to talk about quickly here. Institutions aren't feeling the network, but they feel the repetition of it. And that is exactly why it's easy to miss. 85% report repeat account takeovers, with nearly half of them saying it's frequently. And if you think about that, if my account gets taken over and I get a notice from the company says, hey, your account was taken over, we'd love for you to get reset, come recover your account. I'll do it because I have some value there. I'll go do it. But if I get an email 2 weeks later that says my account's been taken over again, I'm going to close my account because I don't trust that business, right? So, and I'm a good customer, and so that is another impact that you just mentioned, Davi, is like you can't let good customers in if you're going to do all of these weird fraud rules. And so, on this 85%, are there a lot of different attackers, or is it the same few that keep coming back because they found the glitch and they just keep exploiting it?
So so here's where we can start with that answer, right? So most of us are honest people, and most of the people that we know are also honest people. And the reality is that most of people in the world are honest, right? So the population of fraudsters is very small. But when you're talking about identity fraud, you don't know how to count them, right? So a lot of people
Mm.
say, think, oh, this guy didn't pay my loan, right? So it was never this guy; it was someone else. It was a fraudster, right? And you say, oh, there are all these account takeovers, and these are different fraudsters always coming for all these individuals, right? And the reality is that it's probably the same guy, right? Because the fraudster, he frauds the victim identity, and even his own identity is he's hiding, right? That's why biometrics changed the game a lot, right? So when you work with biometrics, the fraudster cannot hide himself, right? So even if you don't know his name, when he's back, we know he's the same person, right? So same person property is held against all odds in biometrics. And other systems do not have this property. SSN doesn't have this property. Password doesn't have this property, right? So it's like without biometrics, you need to defend yourself like you are in a dark alley. So when you improve biometrics, it's always daylight. everyone always have their face-offs, right? So when you can see everyone's faces, there is always accountability. You know how to who to trust and who to not trust, and you get to see the real numbers. You figure out if you lock this small population out, then you have everyone that is good population. They can come, they can do business. They don't need to pay for those other guys, right? They don't need to pay hops. They don't need to pay in insurance or nothing like that. And yes, it's very painful for the legitimate users to pay this widespread cost of fraud that is done by very few individuals, right? And these are individuals that they they don't mind the amount of damage they do to get their small share of fraud.
Yeah. And those numbers are staggering, right? 6 million ATO victims in 2025, which has been a 141% increase since 2021. And as I mentioned, as we keep it moving here, you're not sharing customers, you're sharing fraud, right? Signals travel, records stay. But with that in mind, so I mentioned before, hey, as a previous buyer in my previous roles at Airbnb and Google, there's always talk about network data, sharing in a consortium. Hey, you get what you pull out. But it was always very tough because one, you're a big company. Who else is your size you're going to get some benefit from it? The other pushback always was, how am I going to get this through my legal team? Right? How do we get this through? And so, what, Davi, when you are talking to customers, I'm sure they've had those same concerns about, like, hey, we can't just share all our data with you. We can't share our data with our competitors, even though we'd be sharing fraud data. So talk me through about how do you approach that? Because that feels like one of the biggest hurdles to clear is internal alignment for you to participate.
Yes. So I think the slide gives part of the answer here. Is that yes, when you are in a network, you're sharing information, but that information is used for a specific purpose under the specific governance, and that is anti-fraud. And as we have said, when fraud goes down, everyone gets happier, right? So we often are bringing together CISOs to talk about that. Anyone in the audience, right, if becomes Unico customer or interested in become Unico customer, maybe can go one of those audiences and learn the benefits of that. But I think the main point is the data that gets shared, it plays a very specific purpose, and the data that we gather, it's only what we need for that purpose, right? So you're not getting all your data, you're not using that data to build things that are not in the in your interest, right? And that's how it works. But yeah, there is a flip side. There is some leap of faith here, right? So if you um, want to say, oh, I'll take my frauds and he takes his and let whoever is best win. Yes, it's a stance you can have. It's a legitimate stance. Being in this industry for a while, I think it's a losing proposition.
So yeah, no, absolutely. So now the other concern, again, I'm bringing up concerns. You're my answer guy on this one. Um, if something gets added to the network, there's also, and if it's only, you know, adding records and you can't get rid of records in it, then it kind of becomes a blacklist, and nobody wants to be part of that either. So is there a correction path? How do you audit if something was wrong? How do I, maybe I did something suspicious. How do I get out of the network, being tagged as a fraudster if it was wrong?
Yeah, so ultimately you're choosing to not allow some people to go through because we have learned that these people are not good, right? So sometimes this feels like a block list, right? But and whenever you have a system with these properties, you need to have governance. You need to have some governance around that. Uh, the cost of the governance it's highly associated with the effectiveness of the techniques and the network, right? So when you're talking about liveness techniques, most people that are committing fraud are especially sophisticated fraud are being very intentional, right? And these people, we learn about them, we know their defenses are their attack sophisticated is increasing, and we're looking to them and we're blocking them, right? But the reality, most of the people are not committing sophisticated fraud. It's not like if you try to get a picture and put your phone in front of it, you're gonna get into something that feels a blocklist. We don't care about the simple attempts or nothing like that. Uh, Unico, we have a mantra that we use internally, right? So we are not after the fraudsters. We are after the fraud itself. The purpose
Mm.
of Unico is to avoid the fraud. It's not our purpose to judge people, to say whether they're good people or not people. This belongs somewhere else, right? So all we do is to gather evidence, and we are very confident of that evidence when we say you should not do business with these people, right? They're going to tell that to you, and maybe you're going to do a mistake. We have our numbers. Most of the mistakes are solved. Just hit try a couple times, so in 2 minutes, the mistakes are gone. But maybe there will be some kind of mistake that is long-lived for some reason, and in the end, it's going to be your whole to to work with Unico towards a way of giving access to that users. So biometrics does not work to 100% of the population, right? Unfortunately, there are people who have suffer physical incidents, who have some healthy conditions, and we still need to have tracks for these people. It's also part of our business to support institutions on having these other channels for exception. But in our reality, in our day to day, someone that gets wrongly rejected all the time is not a blacklist. It's not a simple thing like that, like this. But someone that gets rejected all the time and we get a complaint about that, well, I don't think it's part of our day to day, right? So you're past that time. But of course, if there is an exception, we have all of our governance behind.
Okay, so what does the network native look like on a Tuesday? I know it's a Wednesday, but what does that look like? So the good news is the market is not sitting around waiting for permission. It's already voting with its budget. And so we're seeing this, and it's voting away from the checks that run once. Remember that rung ladder on the first rung? People are moving away from that. So now what we're seeing here is 76% are saying that rank device fingerprinting as their top defense against AI-enabled fraud. 64% say they are looking at behavioral biometrics as a very important signal, and device intelligence at 61%. So just document verification is starting to slide down the importance ladder. You cannot just do a document check and be done with it. Strengthening partnerships, 47% named at a top 26 priority. And it's the largest year-over-year increase in any category we've measured. And then the last one, 62% expect compliant budget to rise. So we are going to see more money coming into this from the buyer side. And buyers are really looking for, hey, I know you can do a document, I know you can do a face, but what can you do around that actually is going to help me protect against this AI and this AI stuff? Davi, you think the budget intent is enough on its own or not? What else needs to happen in these organizations to shift from ladder rung 1 to maybe 3 or 4? What else needs to happen?
I don't think simply that the budget is shifting, because it tends to be a win-win movie, right?
Mm.
So if you are already operating on some kind of budget at level 1, right? So you already pay for that. You already pay for the actions on level 2, and that budget usually bigger than the budget that is gonna come to Unico or some other company that are gonna solve the problem in a very effective way for you. right? So it's not a matter of budget. It's really a matter of changing the mindset, right? So the big problem tends to see that the expense in level one and level two, it's the spread around different parts of the company, right? So you have the fraud team budget and you have the credit team budget. Like credit, all the time they say, "Oh, you only get bad payers," right? It's not about that, right? So it's a fraudster, right? And the expense and the defenses, it's a spread. So you cannot look at the P&L and say, "Oh, this is the one thing," because fraud is deceiving you, right? So you're paying several places. It's death by a thousand cuts. When our clients usually move to Unico, what they see in the very beginning is that, "Oh, we had no other choice than add this extra budget here to anti-fraud, but it's a good investment, it's effective." But what happens months afterwards is that they suddenly find that all the other costs that they have, they're no longer needed. They can turn off the systems, right? And when sometimes they can decrease headcount as well, right? So I really don't get that happy when that happens, but it's part of the game. So you solve problems that are in other areas that are spread around the company, and in the end, the budget shrinks a lot. So I think one advice that I would give people is that try moving towards the connected defense styles. Try to get a taste from it. Try to, I don't know, get into a freemium layer, some experiment, and look into it. Then you're gonna see the economics really changing, right? So unfortunately, most of that happens in time of crisis when the fraudsters scale. But the reality is that in the times of pieces, this is where you have the most to benefit from, because it's going to give you a competitive advantage, right? So you're going to give better service to your clients, you're going to give less friction to your clients, you're going to get your budget and spread to more revenue generating parts of the company instead of spending it on defense.
Yeah, and again, I think that's such an important part is the good customer impact, right? If your network is killing all the fraud, but it's increasing my conversion rejections as well, companies are not going to like that, right? So they're always going to look for that balance. Can you help me reduce the fraud? But I also still need to service my good customers. So I think that's a super important part of this equation. So the one move. So now, Davi, on this fraud maturity ladder. So as we mentioned before, you have this isolated and static all the way to network native. And with this, we're seeing the fraud sitting at the level 5, but everybody else is only 5% of organizations are self declared to be at this level. So Davi, if you look at the different markets, like whether that's different regions or different verticals like financial institutions versus marketplaces, what type of attacks are they seeing and where are they on this ladder? Are we seeing financial institutions mostly on the 4 and the 5s, or are they still also struggling and they're still in the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s?
Most of the large financial institutions in very developed markets, in terms of technologies, where uh, you have banking solutions that work through your phone, that you never go to a retail agency, that you never need to get into a phone call, that you have very high uh, conversion rates. You can borrow money very quickly. I think most of those are 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 either already network native or moving to that, right? Of course, I have a bias when I say that, because that's what I see more my clients than my known clients. But the reality is that it's usually connected to how much you expose yourself to risk. And the institutions that expose themselves more to risk, they tend to have a competitive advantage anyway, right? So I think the more sophisticated the market gets, the more competitive it gets, the more digital it gets, the more you get uh, people moving toward network native. And I would say in several markets. All the big ones are already in this place. And now you're starting to see the new business being born this way, right? So the old way still exists, but in the market where the big guys have moved, everyone have tagged along. So,
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Some questions. Davi, we have a couple questions, but
sure.
before we get there, I wanted to ask you a quick question. Um, Obviously, we're talking in periods of like quarters now where fraud is just accelerating so quickly. By the end of 2026, what is that fraud vector or that fraud attack that is like top of mind for you and your clients?
So I think it's still deepfake, Philip. I think deepfake is going to migrate to other channels. For example, this bank authentication. I think, as I said, most banks which are truly digital now are migrating to biometrics, and they're going to deploy solutions like the ones from Unico. They're going to deploy liveness. They are going to deploy some sort of biometrics one-to-one solutions, which are very effective at detecting recurring fraudsters. So that channel is well defended. It's an ongoing fight, right? So as I said, there are billions of dollars being poured, but as an industry, we have learned how to defend those technologies, right? I think even Google yesterday or a couple of days ago launched their own password recovery based on selfie and liveness. So
Hmm.
I think the industry is getting there, but I think it's going to start to leak into other channels, right? So when you need to issue a certificate now, a safe certificate, usually you go to a video conference and they look at your face, they ask some questions, and people still believe that channel is safe. Well, it's not, right? So you need to remove that from the root of trust. Um, Things like interviews for jobs, like fake employees interviews, are things that we already see. And the reality is that how do you know it's me here, right? So how do you know it's Davi? The technology is already there. This channel, things like this we're doing now, are still not being compromised, but it's on the shelf now. By the end of the year, probably you're going to start to see fraud migrating to old channel to other channels, right? So your mom calling you asking to wire money, expect that to happen, right? It's not gonna be your mom, but yeah.
Yeah, it is always the weakest link, right? Where can you get in and do some damage? So if the Google account is doing selfie and that gets compromised, now you have access to an account that's probably linked to a bunch of different
Yes.
companies, right? You've used Google sign in. You're using your email as a username with a password, and now all of a sudden, so it's only has strongly you can defend the weakest link is how strong the system's going to be as a whole. So I think, yeah, I think you're right. It's not going to go away. It's just going to find I always say fraud is like water. It finds a way to flow, right?
Yes.
It will find a way to flow, and it's going to try to flow the easiest path down. Um, Davi, we're about near the end here. Any closing remarks? Anything you want the audience to take away before we close this thing down?
I think the most important thing that I want to bring is really that you can no longer trust what you see, right? So on the internet, that cannot be believed anymore, right? So in Blade Runner, you have fake humans walking around, and you couldn't tell them apart for bots. Well, that reality already have arrived in the digital. You need to defend yourself against it, right? And biomet is the most effective solution. It's really the most cybersecurity. It works as a captcha. It works as several things. It guarantees there is a human being there. Guarantees it's the real human being you expect. And you need to deploy that technology. You need to deploy it everywhere there is authentication because the bots are there. Otherwise, we're going to be talking with bots. Maybe it's not Unico that the company. I would hope it's Unico, the company that you come for. But there are other similar solutions in the market. The time to get there is now, right? So the time to get there is now. You're going to fall behind, not because you're not seeing the frauds. As I said, sometimes it takes time for the fraud to come, but because others have migrated, they already have a competitive advantage. This kind of solutions, it not only gives better protection, it gives better experience. I no longer type passwords. I think everyone now uses passkey or uses sorts of biometric solutions. And that is, if you are not on that boat, you're going to be left behind.
Awesome, man. Listen, thank you so much for the time today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Everybody in the audience, you will get this replay in the inbox. As we mentioned, the full report, you can scan it, come to the website, reach out to Davi, reach out to me. We love these types of interactions. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them over to us. Davi, with that, thank you so much. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, all.